How does a kid from the streets of Brazil rise so fast that the entire world calls him perfect, only for his own body to try and destroy everything? How does a player become unstoppable, unplayable, untouchable, and still end up powerless at the biggest moment of his life? And how does someone lose everything, only to come back and rewrite football history forever? This is the story of Ronaldo Nazário, the phenomenon who refused to break. Before the world knew him as R9, before the records, the trophies, and the fear he put into defenders, he was just a boy from Bento Ribeiro, a rough neighborhood on the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro. Football wasn't just a dream there. It was survival. It was escape. And for Ronaldo, it was everything. He didn't grow up with luxury. He didn't grow up with opportunities handed to him. He grew up with hunger. The kind of hunger that turns talent into obsession. Even when he was just a teenager, there was something different about him. Not just speed, not just skill, but a kind of violence in the way he attacked the game. Defenders weren't just beaten, they were erased. And it didn't take long before Brazil realized they had something special. At just 17, he was already part of the squad that would go on to win the 1994 World Cup. He didn't play a single minute, but that tournament became his classroom. Watching, learning, absorbing everything. Because deep down, he knew his real moment was still coming. Then came Europe, and everything changed. At PSV Eindhoven, Ronaldo didn't just arrive, he exploded. In his very first season, he scored 35 goals in 36 games. Not as a seasoned striker, but as a teenager. The league couldn't handle him, defenders couldn't read him, goalkeepers couldn't react fast enough. It was like watching something unnatural, like the game itself couldn't keep up with him. But while the world was watching goals, something else was quietly building in the background. Injuries. Small at first, easy to ignore, just pain, just discomfort, nothing serious. That's what everyone thought, even Ronaldo himself. Because when you're that good, when everything feels unstoppable, you don't think about what could go wrong. You just keep going, and he did. Even in his second season, despite missing games, he still delivered. 19 goals in 21 matches. Numbers that didn't make sense for someone so young. And by then, Europe had already made its decision. He wasn't just a talent anymore. He was the future. So when FC Barcelona came calling with a world record fee, it wasn't a gamble. It was inevitable. And what followed was pure destruction. Because in Spain, Ronaldo didn't just play football. He redefined it. 47 goals in 49 games. Let that sink in. Not in a weak league, not in easy matches, but at the highest level. Week after week, defenders lined up with one plan: survive. And most of them couldn't. Stepovers at full speed, explosive runs from midfield, finishing so clinical it felt automatic. It wasn't normal. It wasn't human. That season, he didn't become one of the best. He became the best in the world. At just 20 years old, FIFA crowned him World Player of the Year. The youngest ever. A kid from the streets of Brazil, now sitting at the top of football. But even at the top, things were already starting to crack. Contract disputes cut his time in Barcelona short. Chaos behind the scenes forced him out just as he reached his peak. And once again, the world watched as another record was broken. Because this time, Inter Milan paid even more to bring him to Italy. The toughest league in the world. The ultimate test. And still, Ronaldo made it look easy. 34 goals in 47 games. Defenders in Serie A, known for their discipline and structure, were left chasing shadows. Week after week, stadiums filled not just to watch a match, but to witness him. The speed, the power, the control. It didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been possible. That's when they gave him the name, the Phenomenon. A name that sounded like greatness, but carried something else, pressure. Because a phenomenon isn't allowed to fail. A phenomenon isn't allowed to feel pain. A phenomenon doesn't slow down, doesn't break, doesn't stop. And Ronaldo knew that, but deep down, his biggest fear had already begun to follow him. Injuries. Because no matter how strong you are, no matter how gifted, there is one thing every athlete fears more than anything else. Not losing, not failure. But the moment your own body turns against you. And for Ronaldo, that moment was getting closer. Then came 1998. The World Cup. The dream. The stage where everything was supposed to come together. A nation waiting. A country obsessed with football. Brazil wasn't just expecting victory. They demanded it. And at the center of it all stood Ronaldo, not just as a player, but as a symbol. The one who would bring Brazil their 5th title, the one who would complete the story. But just hours before the biggest match of his life, everything fell apart. A seizure, out of nowhere. No warning, no explanation. One moment, everything was normal. The next, chaos. Rush to the hospital. Confusion everywhere. Fear, panic. Questions no one could answer. And somehow, he still made it back. Back onto the pitch. Back into the final. But something was wrong. He wasn't the same. On the other side stood Zinedine Zidane. And that night, France didn't just win. They dominated. And as the final whistle blew, Ronaldo stood there, watching his dream disappear in front of millions. The boy from Bento Ribeiro had reached the biggest stage in the world and lost everything. But what no one knew at that moment was that this wasn't the lowest point of his story, not even close. Because the real battle hadn't even begun. In November 1999, Ronaldo Nazário faced the first real moment where football was no longer under his control. For the first time in his life, his body stopped responding the way it always had. Tests revealed the truth, a partial rupture of the patella tendon. The message was simple: keep playing and everything could collapse. Surgery was no longer a choice. It was the only option. The operation went well and doctors were confident. With time, with patience, with discipline, he would return to normal. But this wasn't normal. This was Ronaldo. And while the world questioned whether he would ever be the same again, he refused to accept anything less than a full comeback. Rehabilitation became his life. Endless sessions, pain, isolation. Every small movement felt like a victory. He convinced himself that everything would go back to how it was, that the story wasn't over. And somehow, just 5 months later, he was back. The anticipation around his return was enormous. The stadium waited. The world watched. But then, in a single moment, everything collapsed again. His knee gave out in the most brutal way possible. This time, it wasn't just an injury, it was devastation. The rupture was complete. The damage was far worse. And suddenly, the conversation changed. This wasn't about returning to the top anymore. This was about whether he would ever play football again. A specialist in the United States delivered the harshest reality. Even in the best-case scenario, he might live a normal life. But football? That chapter could be over forever. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. Pain became routine. Doubt crept in. There were moments where quitting felt easier than continuing. But quitting was never an option. Step by step, he rebuilt everything. Learning to walk again, then to run, then to touch the ball. Every movement was a battle. Every improvement came with suffering. But just as his body began to recover, a new challenge emerged. At Inter Milan, things had changed. The club wanted discipline, structure, control. Under coach Hector Cooper, flair was no longer the priority, and Ronaldo didn't fit. To the coach, he wasn't the solution. He was a risk, a problem, someone who couldn't be trusted. Minutes disappeared, opportunities vanished. The bench became his reality. With the 2002 World Cup approaching, time was running out. He didn't just need to recover. He needed to prove himself again, to his club, to his country, to everyone. Because without playing, there would be no World Cup. And without the World Cup, the dream would die. At the most critical moment of the season, even Hector Cooper had no choice but to take a risk. Ronaldo was finally given a chance. And in that moment, everything changed. The sharpness was back, the movement, the instinct, the presence. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to remind the world who he was. The narrative shifted instantly, from finished to returning, from doubt to belief. But one final decision remained. Would he be selected for Brazil? Coach Luis Felipe Scolari faced the biggest gamble of his career, a player who hadn't fully proven his fitness, a legend returning from the edge of retirement. The nation waited, and then the decision was made. Ronaldo was going to the World Cup. At the 2002 FIFA World Cup, every step he took carried doubt. Every sprint tested his body. Even he wasn't sure if his knee would hold. But from the very first match, something became clear. He was back. Goal after goal, performance after performance, Ronaldo didn't just play, he dominated. The fear was gone. The hesitation disappeared. The world watched as the phenomenon returned to life. Even when pain followed him, even when the media focused on every weakness, he found a way to shift the narrative. Even his iconic haircut became a distraction, pulling attention away from his injuries. And once again, he found himself in the World Cup final. But this time, everything was different. This time, he was ready. In that final, Ronaldo Nazário didn't just play for a trophy. He played for every moment of pain, every doubt, every step of recovery that brought him back to that stage. 2 goals. Redemption, glory, Brazil were champions again. And in that moment, Ronaldo didn't just win the World Cup, he completed the greatest comeback football had ever seen. From the brink of retirement to the top of the world. After 2002, the story could have ended there, but legends don't stop at redemption. At Real Madrid, he became part of the Galacticos era. Goals continued to flow, titles followed. The magic was still there. 177 matches, 104 goals. But football is never a straight line. Criticism returned, injuries followed, his physical condition became a constant topic. And slowly, the dominance began to fade. A move to AC Milan offered a fresh start. For moments, the old Ronaldo reappeared. The instinct, the finishing, the brilliance. But fate wasn't done. Another devastating knee injury struck. The same nightmare, the same pain. Once again, the world feared it was over. And this time, it almost was. Recovery became slower, harder, more uncertain, but even then, he refused to walk away quietly. Back in Brazil, he searched for one last chapter, one final fight, one last chance to feel the game again. Because for Ronaldo, football was never just a career, it was who he was. So the question is, where do you rank Ronaldo Nazário among the greatest of all time? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, real stories of football legends, struggles, and greatness, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next story is coming soon.